Within hours of Traoré's bombshell announcement in Oslo, mainstream news outlets scrambled to regain control of the narrative. CNN called it an anti-Western outburst, while BBC wondered if Africa's youngest leader had gone too far. But in Bamako, in Kigali, in Johannesburg, crowds erupted in applause. Traoré's refusal was not simply political theater. It was a statement forged in the fires of exploitation, colonial plunder, and decades of economic strangulation. "We do not need their medals," Traoré roared in a live speech streamed across Africa. "What we need is land, truth, and the right to breathe without asking permission." Across the continent, his voice echoed like thunder. Young Africans saw in him not just a president, but a symbol, a man unchained from the velvet shackles of Western diplomacy. Editorials in The Guardian and Le Monde warned that his rejection could destabilize global norms. But among grassroots movements, the opposite happened. Traoré's act became a lightning rod. From Nairobi to Lagos, political youth leagues organized overnight vigils. Artists painted Traoré with a cracked Nobel medal falling from his hands. The message was clear. The global South had found its own voice. Just days later, the world witnessed the second shockwave. Barack Obama, the poster child of Western soft power, went on live television with a look of grave introspection. "When I accepted the Nobel in 2009, I believed in the image it represented," he said, voice steady but heavy. "But now, I realize I was being used. My acceptance helped veil the realities of drone warfare, broken diplomacy, and economic coercion." He held up the medal, polished, golden, and gleaming in the spotlight, and placed it gently in a black case. "Today, I return this not in shame, but in truth." Gasps echoed across newsrooms. The man once hailed as a beacon of American civility had just admitted complicity in a global performance. In Washington, Republicans erupted. "Treason!" Some cried. Democrats scrambled to contain the political fallout. Former President Donald Trump posted in all caps, "Obama spits on American honor." Traitor. The Nobel Committee responded with a cautious statement, affirming the prize's independence and historical credibility. But the damage had already been done. Two of the most symbolic Nobel moments in recent history had been publicly dismantled, one rejected, the other returned. In the halls of international diplomacy, panic quietly spread. Emergency meetings were called within the G7. Intelligence briefings, once reserved for conflict zones, now focused on the optics war sparked by Traoré and Obama. Leaked audio from a private EU summit captured one diplomat saying, "If we lose the Nobel's moral ground, we lose the illusion of global leadership." That illusion was already slipping. In Burkina Faso, posters went up. "The Nobel is dead. Justice is alive." In the slums of Port-au-Prince, Haiti, a street poet wrote, "They gave medals for silence. We give fists for truth." The ripple wasn't just political, it was spiritual. A generation raised under the myth of merit-based justice suddenly saw through the facade. Peace, they realized, wasn't something given. It was taken by force, by trade deals, by bombs wrapped in democracy. Obama's decision triggered more than partisan anger. It exposed a deeper crack in the American conscience. On one side, critics called him a coward seeking relevance. On the other, voices like Cornel West and Angela Davis praised his courage, calling it the most honest moment of his political life. Students marched across UC Berkeley and Howard University, with signs reading, "If Obama can return the Nobel, what can you return?" Hashtags like hashtag return the prize and hashtag TRA or eAcute effect trended globally. Even celebrities joined in. Actor John Boyega tweeted, "Respect to Traoré. Respect to Obama. Real peace can't be gold-plated." But it wasn't just symbolism anymore. Parliamentarians in South Africa, Brazil, and Pakistan called for independent reviews of foreign influence in their own national honor systems. In France, a leaked memo revealed concern that other leaders might pull an Obama. Meanwhile, Traoré continued speaking not to Western journalists, but to his people. In a town hall in Ouagadougou, he stood under the sun and said, "They called it peace while we buried our children. They called it aid while they took our minerals. They called it honor while we lived with dishonor. No more." In capitals once considered strongholds of diplomacy, Paris, Berlin, London, discomfort became palpable. News anchors fumbled to reframe the story. Was this anti-West sentiment or a call for reform? CNN asked, visibly uneasy. The New York Times published an editorial urging the public not to romanticize symbolic rebellion. But the tides of global discourse had already shifted. On the streets of Nairobi, thousands marched wearing shirts that read, "Our leaders don't need medals. They need freedom." In Accra, a university mural depicted a cracked Nobel medallion bleeding red onto the African soil. In Caracas, student leaders cited Traoré's speech as proof that the global South was no longer willing to be lectured about peace by those who funded war. Everywhere, the message was clear. The monopoly on moral authority was broken. In the corridors of the UN, silence turned to suspicion. Delegates from non-aligned nations demanded that Western institutions stop defining global values unilaterally. The representative from Bolivia stood up during a General Assembly debate and said, "If the Nobel Prize is blind to blood, then it is blind to justice." Applause erupted not just from Latin America or Africa, but from smaller nations in Asia and Oceania. For once, the moral compass wasn't pointing north. It was spinning freely. Meanwhile, the Nobel Committee in Oslo found itself in a rare state of public scrutiny. Its members, historically untouchable, were bombarded with letters, emails, and petitions demanding transparency. Who nominates? Who decides? And why are voices of resistance always omitted? Read one open letter from a global coalition of academics. The committee responded with a lukewarm promise to review nomination protocols. But in the eyes of millions, the damage was irreversible. The Western backlash grew more aggressive. Think tanks published reports warning of a growing tide of symbolic insurrection. Former British Prime Minister Tony Blair warned that if global institutions are undermined, chaos will follow. On Fox News, pundits declared Traoré a radical Marxist in military fatigues. On French TV, one anchor asked if Obama had been emotionally manipulated by African populism. But the more they dismissed, the louder the world listened. Even within the West, resistance was brewing. In the streets of Chicago, New York, and Marseille, people gathered not in violence, but in solidarity. "Return the myths," they chanted. "Return the medals. Return the lies." Meanwhile, Obama, now removed from the machinery of state, traveled quietly to Johannesburg, where he met with youth leaders, land reform activists, and Pan-African historians. In a closed-door forum, he reportedly said, "When I was president, I thought diplomacy was balance. Now I realize balance without justice is just silence with better grammar." Word of that quote leaked and exploded online. Even critics were stunned by the bluntness. Obama had gone from the architect of drone strikes to a man unraveling the very fabric of Western soft power. Some speculated this new stance might alienate him from elite circles. But in return, he gained something else: authenticity. His return of the Nobel was no longer a gesture. It was a warning, and the world had started to listen. Back in Burkina Faso, Traoré's political gamble was turning into a cultural revolution. Young people, previously skeptical of politics, flooded town halls, asking how they could participate in rebuilding a new system, one not beholden to foreign aid or imperial nostalgia. Schools began rewriting history curricula to include indigenous freedom fighters, not just French generals. Radio stations played clips of Traoré's Oslo speech in between music tracks. A sense of pride long suppressed under economic dependency was erupting like wildfire. Neighboring countries took notice. In Mali, Niger, and Guinea, politicians began echoing Traoré's rhetoric. The African Union held an emergency summit in Addis Ababa, where some delegates proposed creating a new Pan-African award system free from European oversight. The Nobel, they argued, had lost its moral currency. Why should our heroes be judged by those who don't understand our pain? Asked one speaker. The applause shook the room. Across the ocean, in Washington, D.C., fear turned into strategy. Think tanks convened urgent panels titled Restoring Global Credibility. State Department officials, once dismissive of Traoré, now monitored his speeches like intelligence briefs. The Pentagon quietly commissioned psychological profiles, not of Traoré, the military man, but of Traoré, the myth. They wanted to understand how a leader barely 40 years old had undone a century's worth of soft power illusions in a matter of months. Meanwhile, a controversial op-ed in the Wall Street Journal argued that perhaps the Nobel Peace Prize had been awarded too carelessly, too politically, and that Obama's return should trigger deeper introspection. It was the first time a major Western publication echoed the word.